Hi everyone, I'm super excited to host Gwyllim Jahn. He's lecturer at RMIT University, co-founder of Fologram, and co-founder of RunChat. And I interviewed him years ago about talking about Fologram story. It was an amazing product, and now he's back with another grand product called RunChat. So I gotta get him on the show and talk about what inspired him to build this product. So thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thanks very much for having me, Mayur, and for the kind introduction, long introduction. Too many things going on.
Yeah, so maybe you can share how are you doing time management, managing all these things?
Well, it's a bit of a trade secret, really. How do you do three things full time at once? I mean, Fologram is still our day job, and I've been working on RunChat as a kind of an obsession for the last 12 months in the evenings. And something I've always done for, since being a student is teaching at the academy at RMIT. I'm there part time. So that's how you can kind of fit these three things together. You just work all the time.
Got it. And what kind of courses or content do you teach?
So I teach into the architecture school at RMIT, and that is mostly teaching design studios in the master's program there or design electives, which are kind of a design adjacent. And they're really fantastic laboratories really for trying to find like the forefront of technologies that are interesting to architects or creatives. And I've been using those courses for the last couple of years to experiment with generative AI in particular and augmented reality fabrication with Fologram.
So that becomes your R&D and experimentation zone.
Yeah, it does. Like, I mean, there'll usually be some new piece of technology that's fascinating me for some reason. And I'll usually be spinning up a kind of a MVP product for it. You'll have some ideas for what you think people might find useful or find engaging. And the design studios or electives, they're really fantastic ways to just, test that out with a group of pretty smart, pretty engaged, creative people, really. It's a good way to get some really quick feedback on what is and isn't working, and also I guess, learn whether or not your intuition about something that might be useful is actually making people's lives easier or maybe making it way harder. Like, if a student can't use the tool, then probably no one can. So, yeah.
And since you're forefront of in technology in architecture, what do you think with this rising Gen AI tools, LLM, text to image multimodal tools? How is that impact the future of architectural education?
Oh, that's a great question. I think for a long time, I didn't think it was going to have a very immediate impact because, say, like 3 or 4 years ago, when Mid-Journey came out, diffusion models were all the rage for image generation. It felt like the number of things those tools could actually do in a design process was pretty limited. Like, they were great for exploring images of some future building, but they weren't able to, say, generate consistent views of a building or take a screenshot and render it or generate a 3D model of a building or, um, have a look at a screenshot and tell you which building codes it was and wasn't satisfying, or to look at a plan and tell you if the plan was working or not. There's all these things that these generative AI models just couldn't do, even though they could make images that superficially looked like finished buildings. And so I was advising students, all of your skills are still really useful, and these tools are just like they're toys. They're fun for playing around. But I think now I suspect that more and more kind of aspects of architectural practice will get automated. Like, project management will be automated, rendering will be automated, concept design, exploration for clients, where a client might give you a bunch of images that they like and you then give them a bunch of sort of ideas for projects like that. That will be accelerated. I don't think that will be automated. Planning, parts of planning are likely to be automated. And so for students who are studying now, I think it's pretty important to be in control of these tools, to be able to use them critically and to understand what their limitations are, and be able to build their own tools if they need to contribute to practice.
One thing I would like to know is from architecture and technology education and the domain expertise to running a company. this whole new set of skills you learned. So what would now you're running your second company. So what's the playbook you're adopting now for the second company from years of experience that okay, I can save some time by doing this first?
I mean, we still run both. Look, something that we did with Fologram was we built a tool that we really needed ourselves. So I was like, a practitioner. I was doing designs. I was designing things that were really hard to build, and Fologram helped us to build designs that would have just been really difficult to build otherwise. So we knew that we'd solved our own problem, like 100% for sure, because we were using our software all the time. And it just became a case of, well, how many other people have a similar problem? Who is working with non-standard materials or complex form, curvilinear geometry, things that are hard to describe with drawings? Maybe they'll also benefit from using Fologram. That was like how you transition with the first company. It's you build something that you find useful, and then you find out if there's a market for that tool. With RunChat, it's a bit different. Honestly, it breaks almost every rule of how you're supposed to start a company. So if you've read any business books, or if you've read like Lean Startup or Zero to One or any of these kinds of books, and you're thinking about starting a company, you've gone and watched all the Y Combinator videos, all the rest of it. RunChat just breaks every rule because it is very much, it's a project that is driven, it's kind of quite mission driven. And the mission that I have with RunChat is, I think that with all of these generative AI tools, so language models, diffusion models for generating images, image to 3D models, my hunch is that people are not being as creative with them as the models are able to be creative. People tend to see something on, a good example is when everyone started using ChatGPT to make Studio Ghibli images. Millions and millions and millions of people producing the same kinds of things with these incredibly powerful models. And not a lot of people, like individual designers, having lots of agency to pursue a broad range of like creative applications of those tools. So my hunch is that there's like a whole lot more unlocked creative potential with these tools that we are limited from engaging with because we don't have the right user interface for the tools. Like a chat interface is not the right interface for using most generative AI models. That's my hunch. And so it's not the way you start a business with a hunch about like, oh, then maybe there's something more here necessarily. It's not solving a problem. It's actually trying to create an entirely new market by creating or unlocking a whole lot of use cases or demonstrating a whole lot of use cases for these tools that otherwise didn't exist. That's what we're trying to do with RunChat. It's also based off a bit of I mean, I have this problem myself, but it's a different, like I use RunChat to solve my own problems, but the problem is pretty, like I would like to have a way of automating creative tasks in a way where I can save time on all the things I don't want to do, like all the repetitive boilerplate type stuff, and then give me more time to come up with better ideas, like to produce stronger arguments for the designs that I'm exploring, or push my design in a direction that's unexpected that I haven't seen before, or make it easier to collaborate with other people. So I'm really trying to find a way to both unlock new creative use cases for Gen AI and also automate the boilerplate, boring work of like creative practice.
There's so many questions I have uh, because first of all, I must congratulate you. Like every time I see your chips on LinkedIn, I'm like, oh, this is cool. You're building something awesome. And also to your point, we are maybe in the like most of the time just using a very traditional or under leveraged way of getting output from this model, okay, text to image. But uh we haven't explored much like AI native design workflows. What
Mm,
is a AI design agent look like? Is it doing task, getting feedback and the loop? And like
mm,
this interface is one part of that exploration.
mm.
Or like instead of one to one, like what's the one to many? And the whole thing is, yeah.
Yeah. I think that term you just mentioned there, an AI design agent, is really interesting because I think that real design will be one of the last things to be automated, because good design necessitates being able to think outside of the defined brief. like you're redefining what the question is as well as designing for the question, right? Like you're defining the question as well as the answer to the question. And so I think that's something that generative AI models are not going to be particularly good at because you always need to give them direction for now. They don't, you can't, I mean, you can put them in a while loop and just run them and they'll go off and do whatever, but you have to give them a goal. They're fine tuned to have a goal. And so this idea of it, and I actually think that it's why there's probably a whole lot of low hanging fruit in the idea of a design agent because you're never going to actually be able to automate design. That's still something that you'll do as a human. But there's so many subtasks to design that it would be super beneficial to automate. Like it'd be amazing to have a really good research agent that could go and find really good precedent for you, or a really good agent that would go and research, say, material specifications for you and find alternative products that are, say, more sustainable or lower cost, have lower embodied energy costs, or whatever it might be. Like there's so many tools out there that could be built to improve design without replacing design. You know what I mean? So I think that's kind of exciting and interesting.
I'm gonna ask some hot takes now. Like, what do you think about biasness in this general purpose AI model? Like, the reason I ask is, how should one think about fine-tuning a design image-based model or not? Or when you mentioned briefly about creativity happens on that exploratory and some outside phase. So how do you one achieve like, okay, out of the box thinking from this kind of AI models?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so when you fine tune, say, an image model, what you are trading off is you're trading off like the creativity of that model, like the number of things that it can generate for specificity. And so I think fine tuning is a really good tool if you are trying to do something like, say, you have a screenshot of a building and you want to render that screenshot in the style of photographs you've already taken of another project you've done. And it's just a way of, it's not never going to be as good as a photograph of a physical building, but it's going to be pretty good at convincing a client, like, this is what it will look like. This is one we've done before. Here's what it's going to look like next. So that fine tuning process gives you consistency in the output, and it gives you this ability to reference existing work in a way that isn't really possible without the fine tune because the model is designed for following like language, and it's hard to describe with language the specificity of the images in the fine tuned data set. So for images, that seems to be what fine tuning is really good at. But I think that the models hate fine tuning because it forces you to collect a data set of images. And as soon as you do that, you're almost like you've got a sunk cost. It's like, okay, well, I've got my fine-tuned model, I've got that data set of images. You end up kind of forcing that fine-tuned model to do something it doesn't necessarily want to do. And the cost of switching to a different fine-tuned model is relatively high. You've got to go back and find another data set of images, retrain the fine-tune. So I think that, like, this new Gemini model, like it was called Nano Banana and now it's called Gemini that came out the other day. I think that the models are going to get good enough that you don't need to fine tune anymore, that you can provide one or two reference images and that'll be enough to guide the model and constrain it to a particular sort of style. And for designers, like for me, that'll be hugely preferable because it makes it much easier to swap out the different reference images. I actually haven't done very much fine tuning with language models, or at least not for a really long time, but I think that it wouldn't surprise me if there's a whole lot of really interesting use cases there as well, specifically for, like, say, individual practices where you might want to fine tune a model on, your specifications, or the way that you do tender applications, or the way that you do contracts with clients. Like you fine tune, say, GPT's open source model, OpenAI's open source model, fine tune it on your data set. And then I imagine it's like the image generated models, like it becomes much more reliable for that really specific use case. So, I mean, I don't know what in terms of, you asked about bias. Like, I think I see that bias as like there's utility in it with the fine tuned
Mm.
models for sure.
And how should a firm think about developing IP or competitive edge when they're using this AI design tools or models?
That's a really good question because almost by definition, it's very hard to develop a competitive edge, say, if you're just using ChatGPT like everyone else, or you're just using Midjourney or Gemini like everyone else, because whenever a new model comes out, everybody gets the benefit of the new model. So there's no competitive edge there. I think this comment might like age really badly. Right now, I think that the best way to develop IP and a competitive edge is to do what I'd call like developing individualized software. So
Yeah.
something that's really exciting now is it's possible for an architect in a firm or anyone who doesn't have a background in software development to spend a couple of days learning how to write a spec for a simple web app and then a couple of days getting Cursor or Claude Code running. And then so long as you don't make a mistake and have a really like overly complicated spec, you can build tools that only you use. And so there's this amazing idea of the person who makes the tool, the bit of software, is the person who writes the brief, who makes the tool, and the one user of the software. And what it's cool about, like, we've made a couple of apps that are used by lots of people, and when you're making an app for lots of people, you're concerned by completely different things compared to if you're just making it for yourself. Like you don't have to worry about security. You don't have to worry about performance. You don't have to
Mm,
worry about it scaling. You don't have to worry about the tech stack. All you care about is, does it solve your particular problem? Does it make your life slightly easier? And it can just be a throwaway. Like it didn't cost you very much at all to make it. So that's where I think architecture practices in particular, but small to medium companies, like generally, could massively benefit from current generation models. Like if AI doesn't get any better, then that is what everyone should be doing, because already right now you could get huge, I think, productivity gains from that. Individualized software. Go do that.
damn, that's a good one. Yeah, it's like the era of microservices because you have this general purpose model, you have a feature or task automation need, you prompt it and make that web app to get the job done instead of waiting for a startup to get it done. That automation will save you hours and that becomes your IP or competitive edge.
100%. Yeah. And if you solve a problem that is really turns out to be a problem for lots of other people as well, then maybe you do like it's hard, I think, to take like a throwaway individualized app and turn it into a product, but that becomes like a pathway. So it's just a prototype. You can at least test it with other users. You can figure out what breaks. You can figure out what sorts of things you need to be concerned about in terms of security or scalability or whatever. And then it could potentially grow. So just like 12 months ago, this would have been pretty much impossible. Like if you have an idea for some productivity tool or little, like anything that you might need in an office, and you've got to go engage like a developer to do it. So yeah, and I think this is really different to the last, say, 10, 20 years of computational design as a discipline. Computational designers would be able to write scripts mostly. You'd write code using an SDK for the CAD app or something that you might use. And then those scripts were also generally just used by the person writing by the computational designer. So that's similar. Okay. But you're very limited by the SDK that you work with. Whereas I think now you can connect different pieces of software together so much more easily, and there's so much more value in that potentially, I think, than just writing Python scripts in C# scripts in Revit or Rhino or whatever it's going to be.
Can you give us a glimpse of how RunChat works?
I can.
Why RunChat? Like you are going away from the chat interface.
Yeah, I'm umming and ahhing about the name. I mean, the idea is that it's you instead of using like language models for chat, you make like runnable processes, runnable workflows. Like you run a chat, but mostly it's a short, memorable name that we can get the .com for if we need to. So it's one of those type deals.
Awesome. So I see a node. It reminds me of Grasshopper now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So RunChat is a node-based editor for creative workflow automation. Um, you can do things like write prompts to language models. So this is a node with the prompt input. It looks sort of like a chat interface. You can choose the language model that you want to run, and you can connect pretty much any language model out there. We use Gemini by default though, because it's a pretty good trade-off between like speed and quality and cost. So we can run it. So each one of these nodes, it is a bit like Grasshopper. It's a node that has inputs and outputs, and so you can build parametric workflows. Also the nodes, like actually we can nerd out a little bit, Mayo, if you want to. It's RunChat's heavily influenced by Grasshopper. I've spent a long time working with Grasshopper. I think David Rutten's a genius, but there's some very deliberate differences in the UI of RunChat compared to the UI of Grasshopper. So one of them is that every node, it's like two sides of a card. So you can flip
Mm,
between inputs and outputs, which just makes it much easier when you're looking at a workflow to see exactly what your data is. The other thing that we have is it's kind of easier to join nodes together. So you can drag from the like from an output, drop on the canvas, it shows you a menu, and then you can choose what you want to do next, and it automatically connects things up.
mm,
So uh, I guess for people who are listening without being able to see the screen, we should probably keep this demo pretty quick. But because we have this parametric workflow, you could have one node which might write a prompt for you. So it's a parametric prompt generation, and then you could feed that into a node which generates an image from the prompt. And then you could take that image and feed it into a node that generates a 3D model. So let's just go ahead and do that, I guess. Like we can make a node that, say, writes a prompt, write an image generation prompt to make a, I don't know, an image of a modernist building, be descriptive and detailed. So just as an example, so this is like a common pattern where you might like have an idea for a prompt and then you flesh that out a little bit with a language model, or you might substitute different ideas together. So that's gone and written like a big, long, detailed prompt for us. And then we're going to plug that into a node that creates an image from a prompt. I don't know, we'll just hit play. So there's a whole lot of generative models in RunChat for making images, videos, all the rest of it. Anything that you might want to do as a creative. So it's going to make our building. You can swap between the models if you want to. So this is a model again that's fairly cheap, fairly fast. And we can edit images. So this is pretty nice. So I've got an image of a building here. Let's turn it into an isometric view, and then let's make a 3D model. So we'll use an edit image, and we're going to write a prompt which says, show me an isometric view of this building. Hit go. And what's nice about this Grasshopper style node-based editor UI is it becomes a bit like an idea history. So while you're exploring a concept, you're able to go, okay, that looks all right. Maybe I'll try another prompt here with a different edit, and you can keep branching and trying different things. You know what I mean? So maybe like with this one, we could just say zoom out and show the whole building instead of doing an
mm.
isometric view, let's say. So, but we've still got both options. You can go back and edit any prompt you like at any point. We can change this model and then rerun our whole workflow. So we'll see which one of these is better. That's zoomed out. We'll just make a 3D model of this one. It's not going to be the most amazing form ever. We're just going to go create 3D model and hit go. That uses, this one's called Trellis, which again is an incredibly cheap, relatively fast 3D model generating tool. You can get a 3D view of it. Once you've got the 3D model, you can take views off of that and render those. You basically have the full gamut of architectural, visual communication type stuff. So that's at a really dumb, quick level how RunChat works.
This is incredible. And also, like, I wanna compliment on like it's a very elegant UI, and I've used this as well as also wanna pick your brain on like how compared to N8 and Make.com
Mhm.
node workflows. Uh, the tech stack choices you had to make. And one of the challenges with this kind of is constant upgrading of new models and adapting the nodes to include that. So how do you optimize for that development?
Well, there's like three questions in there, Mayo. So N8N and Make and those sorts of tools, RunChat actually has a lot in common with those. So that little demo I just showed then was all, I guess, like image generation, like creating assets. So you make a prompt, you make text, then you make image, then you edit the image, then you make a model. But you can also use RunChat to just make API requests to anything on the internet. So you can connect to, say, Slack or your Dropbox account or email or whatever. And you can do like web crawling type requests. So you can say, like, find me these 10 websites and then pull all the data from those websites and feed that into a language model and extract the information you need. And you can run JavaScript code. So actually, that's the next little demo I'll show you in a minute, which we're kind of excited about. But so because it can do those three things, like web requests, running code, searching the internet, you can automate most things that you could do in N8N or Make. But you do need to be a bit more technical. Like, you need to know what an API request is and how to go fill in a header and a body and stuff.
Yeah, got it. And is one thing that came to my mind is like, let's say I build this workflow. Can I then just save it and make an API request? Okay, there's a prompt, create this variation, get an output, and just call it from outside. So it becomes that whole recipe becomes a workflow.
You sure can, yeah. Maybe I'll do a quick screen share and see if I can show you one or two things like that.
And then I'm just maybe getting ahead, create an MCP out of it,
Uh,
and then let the cloud code do the calling.
yeah, all that good stuff. Okay, so let's say you want to write to a Google Sheet with RunChat. So, like, I just made that 3D model. I want to save it to a spreadsheet, something. So there are a bunch of tools that come with RunChat. Like, basically, these are like plugins. And one of these is write to new rows in a spreadsheet. So it looks like all the other nodes. It has some input and output. Like, it asks for the sheet ID that we want to write to, and it has some data that we can write to that sheet. So I'm just going to make some data, like, let's call this a podcast or something, and plug it in. And we can run that node and see what it does. Actually, I haven't tested this node for a while, so hopefully it works. Okay, it's outputted something, so something's happening there. There's probably another node which lets me read my sheet. So I'm going to read the same sheet just to see if podcast has ended up in it. Yeah, there we go. Podcast. So I've used this one for demoing and testing and whatever. So there's a bunch of other stuff in there. So that node has written to a spreadsheet. But this is the really cool bit. So this node is not made by me as the RunChat developer. It's made with RunChat. So you can click on this and it expands it, and you can see what that node is made up of. And it's another workflow. And then this one here, it's also a node. So we can expand that and see that it's made up of a workflow. So everything is nested. You can publish any workflow as a node, which is exactly like with Grasshopper clustering. And these are all individual workflows. So they're like separate files that live on the internet. You build them separately. You can share them with anyone. You can run them from Grasshopper. So it means you can use sheets in Grasshopper if you want to, or anything you can do in RunChat, you can do in Grasshopper. Yeah, that's really cool and exciting. So it's one way of you talked about MCP. RunChat doesn't support, or we don't use the MCP protocol because we don't stream anything yet. And so one thing that MCP is really good at is it's like supporting a streaming protocol between server and client. If we do start streaming, we probably will start using MCP. But what you can do, which is really cool to me, is any RunChat workflow you make, you can use it as a tool with a language model. So you can imagine making a workflow which, say, for example, writes to a Google Sheet. So we just made that workflow. And then we want to be able to just ask a chatbot or ask our agent in RunChat, hey, could you save this to my Google Sheet for me instead of using the nodes or using the workflow? And so we can do that same thing. So we can go and add that same write to new rows sheet as a tool for our agent. And then in here, we can delete all this other stuff. So this is the same node I used before just to make that image generating prompt. We can say, can you write, this is from a tool to the sheet with ID book and hit play. This one I also haven't tested for ages, but in theory, what should happen here is it's going to use that write to new sheet tool. Yeah, sweet. We're all good. So it says I've written, this is from a sheet, a tool. It's gone and like show me the logs. So this is to me the difference between RunChat and N8N and these other tools. You can, with very simple building blocks, make your own workflows, which then become tools for agents. It's super cool. It's like a way of making MCP tools if you want to use MCP, but it's the same kind of idea. Yeah.
Both of these features are super cool. So, uh, incredible job on that. What is something on your bucket list for RunChat, like big feature ideas?
That's a cool question. Look, all the things that I'm trying to do with RunChat, or we're trying to do now, because myself and James, who's working on this, the things that we're really working hard on is just making it much easier for people to use RunChat without any sort of creative writer's block, let's say. So node-based editors, they're flexible, but they're also editing when you use them for the first time. And so there's a lot of powerful things you can do in RunChat, but they're not like obvious to people yet. So we have to find ways to make it like much, much, much easier for people to like learn how to use it and make it intuitive and all the rest of it. I mean, we've worked pretty hard on that already. It's good for some things, but we can always make it better. The other thing that I'm really excited by is building custom user interfaces that live on top of RunChat. So again, this comes back to node editors. Like they're good for automation, but they're bad for manual things. Like let's say you want to draw a shape in RunChat. You can't automate that. That's something you do manually. You draw it in. There's another really, really cool tool that I can show you. This will be like the last demo, I promise. But what I'm most excited by now uh, is making it possible. Like I would love for someone to be able to load up RunChat and go, I want to edit this video by like moving around. I've got 3 clips and I want to be able to cut them and splice them together and export a video. And I want them to be able to do that with RunChat. It's like a mini version of Adobe Premiere or something. Or I want them to be able to do things like you can in Photoshop. Like I want to take an image and adjust the brightness and contrast or add some text to it or anything like that. So what we've been working on with RunChat is tools like that. So this is a way of making and running totally custom React. I don't know if you guys know React, but React is like a front-end web framework. So you can write React code in RunChat to make custom nodes and custom components that will do whatever you want. So if we make an image, let's say we've got one, this is my test prompts, like a building by Gary, and we'll generate some an image and plug that into our custom component. Let's say I want to be able to adjust the brightness and contrast of that image. So it looks nothing like a building by Gary. We're using a different model there, but we can jump into like a kind of a chat interface that lets you chat with your code. It's like a very, very basic version of Cursor or something like that. But I'm going to pick a decent coding model. So we'll use Claude Sonnet 4. And we're really getting into a full-on tech demo here because we're going to say, make a component that lets me adjust the brightness. I got to spell this properly. Brightness, contrast, and saturation of an image. And we'll just hit play. Because Claude or most of these language models, they're really good at writing React code. You can say, look, here's the constraints of the component. It's going to have these props and it has to output things in this way. they're pretty good at one-shotting components. So this one's just done it. And there we go. In the live demo, like straight off the bat, it's made a tool that lets me adjust my brightness and contrast and saturation. All of it's worked perfectly. And I can now share that node with someone else if I want to. And it's just extended what RunChat can do. So everybody else can use RunChat with a brightness, contrast, saturation tool if they want to. So that's something that I'm super excited by. Like I want to make this much easier, much better. It feels like it unlocks, everyone can make their own tools now. That'll be great.
This is a big, now it all ties back to your previous point that, okay, if a small firm wants to make their own custom app, this allows that custom interface for not only them to use, but share it with the team members.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is where lovable meets Annette and meets design.
Yeah, that's one way of putting it, I think. I mean, it's the main. I think there's like tons of use cases for this stuff that it's like obviously useful. Like it's really useful being able to make lots of images quickly, go from image to video to model to 3D model. It's useful running this in Grasshopper. It's useful being able to quickly make these kinds of tools for editing images. But the thing that still needs work, like in terms of what's coming next, is really helping people to like learn the limitations of the models and learn how to express themselves with the models better. And that's like, yeah, that's the really kind of product challenge.
Any things you learned the hard way in developing this product?
Anything I learned the hard way. Yeah, like everything that you assume that will be a good idea in terms of describing what something does is always wrong. It's so, and I think we're still learning this lesson over and over again. Like it's because all of these generative AI models, they're flexible. You can use them for multiple different things. It's actually hard to name them. It's hard to explain to someone what they do. It's not like, in Photoshop, there's a tool that makes your image bigger and a tool that lets you crop the image and a tool that creates a layer and a tool, and those tools aren't like the image resizing tool always does exactly the same thing every time. Or in Rhino, the line tool does exactly the same every time. But the challenge with RunChat is that everything is adaptable and flexible and can change. And so you sort of need to find this. The thing I've learned the hard way over and over again is you give somebody infinite freedom to create whatever they want. But what they actually want is a pre-made tool that just solves their specific problem for them. That's like the optimal scenario for them. They don't want to have to make a tool from scratch, even though I would love it if they did. And so there's this, because we're sort of bootstrapping this, you're trying to build a community around it and show these sort of exciting new use cases for the software. What we're having to do is like make a ton of examples and a ton of like workflows that people might want to use. And then what we're seeing is people gradually adapt and change those workflows and they evolve and become their own thing. That's one thing I've learned the hard way many, many times is people want me to show them how to do something, which is completely fair enough.
Yes, yes, I can relate because even in Notion, they had to build a community. They had to build a lot of templates, and then they're like, okay, start ticket. So that educational and awareness piece, where maybe one of the template or recipe you create goes viral, and that drives more. Oh, we can do this. Okay, now I let it test.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, the other thing that is challenging with all of this stuff is that running these generative models on the cloud is actually really expensive. There's like a big community of people who use things like Comfy UI and can run them locally and save money that way. But then the models are usually slower and it ends up costing you time instead of money. But I think that's something that all companies that are using generative AI services are struggling with is how do you price it? Because
It's a great one. Yeah, maybe there is a balance of like open source nano compressed model which allows more experimentation, and it's like can be using browser compute or like small EC2 server, and for like higher quality you just do credit based. I think that's it.